I can still hear that laugh. It wasn't loud, not the kind that fills a room, but it cut deep like a quiet knife dressed up as a smile. You ever have one of those moments where someone's tone says more than their words ever could? Yeah, that was it. I was standing right there in my own living room, the same house I built with my bare hands 30 years ago. The same floor my wife Linda used to mop every Sunday morning while humming those old country tunes she loved. Everything in that room told my story. The wooden clock on the wall that ticked too loud, the photos on the mantel, the old leather jacket hanging by the door. That jacket had seen more winters than most folks' marriages last. My son Ethan and his wife Chloe had come over that evening. Chloe, with her sharp perfume and sharper tongue, looked around like she was inspecting a thrift store. Her eyes landed on me, or more accurately on what I was wearing. She tilted her head, smiled that polite fake smile people wear when they think they're being kind, and said, "Oh, you still wear that old thing? You really are a simple man, huh?" The words hung there for a second, light as air but heavy enough to bruise. Ethan chuckled awkwardly, didn't say a thing. I just smiled. That kind of tired smile men wear when they've seen enough of life to know that reacting only gives folks more power. But inside, something shifted. Not anger, not yet. More like a quiet sting, a reminder that time moves on, and sometimes the people you love start seeing you through someone else's eyes. I looked down at that jacket, ran my thumb over the faded leather sleeve. That jacket wasn't just clothing, it was a memory. The first thing I bought after landing my first big construction job. Linda used to tease me, saying I wore it like armor. Maybe she was right. Back then it meant pride. Now, apparently, it meant poverty. Chloe sat back on the couch, crossed her legs like she owned the place, and started talking about their new home. Our modern villa, she called it. Big place, all glass and marble somewhere out near the lake. She talked about it like it was proof of success, like owning something shiny made you somebody important. I nodded politely while she spoke, but my mind drifted. I looked at Ethan and my only son, the boy I raised on dusty job sites and late-night diner meals. I remembered the kid who used to say, "Dad, I want to build things just like you." And now he sat there half smiling, pretending not to notice the disrespect dripping from his wife's words. I didn't blame him, not then. Love can blind a man faster than pride ever could. Still, as I sat there, I felt something harden inside me. A quiet realization. She thought I was poor. Maybe he did too. Everyone in that room, dressed in their polished clothes, with their talk of lake houses and wine cellars, thought I was just some washed-up old builder trying to hold on to his glory days. But here's the thing about assumptions. They're dangerous when made about the wrong man. Because the poor old man they saw sitting in that creaky wooden chair still owned the ground beneath their shiny new house. Literally. The land they built that so-called dream home on, the one they bragged about every chance they got, was mine. And as Chloe laughed that night, swirling her glass of imported wine, she had no idea she was laughing in a house that stood on my soil under my name, protected by my signature. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't felt in years. That quiet itch for justice. Not revenge, not yet. Just that slow, deliberate thought that maybe it was time people learned what real value looked like. So I smiled back at her. A calm, knowing smile. The kind of smile that doesn't fight back, doesn't argue. The kind that says, "You'll see." She saw an old man in a worn-out jacket, but I knew what she didn't. That sometimes, the things people laugh at are the same things that will teach them their biggest lesson, and she was about to learn hers. The hard way. My name's William Carter. I'm 56 years old and I live in a small, quiet town just outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where everyone still waves when they drive by, and the corner diner hasn't changed its menu since the early 90s. People here know each other's stories. Mine's written in every nail I hammered, every wall I framed, every home that still stands tall against the wind. For 30 years, I ran a construction company, Carter and Sons Builders. Though truth be told, there was only ever one son. It started as a small dream and grew into something I could be proud of. I didn't come from money or connections. I came from dirt, sweat, and a stubborn belief that a man's word should mean something. When I was younger, I worked 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. My hands were rougher than sandpaper. My back ached more than I'd admit, but I loved it. There was a kind of satisfaction in watching something rise from the ground. knowing that you made it happen. Folks would drive through the neighborhoods I built and see pretty houses. Me, I saw my fingerprints on every single one. Then there was Linda, my wife, my heart. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it feel like home. She had this calm energy, like no matter how hard life hit, she'd find a way to smile through it. We met back when I was working construction on a small church renovation. She was volunteering there, organizing a charity bake sale. I was covered in sawdust and sweat, and she still smiled at me like I was the cleanest man in the room. That was Linda. She didn't see people for what they had. She saw them for who they were. We built a good life together. Nothing fancy, just solid. A home filled with warmth, laughter, and our boy Ethan. He was the center of our world. Linda used to say he had my stubbornness and her heart. Maybe that's why losing her felt like the world went quiet. It's been 8 years since cancer took her. You never really get over something like that. People say time heals, but truth is, it just teaches you how to live with the ache. After Linda passed, the house felt too big, too empty. Every corner reminded me of her. The coffee mug she always used. The blanket she'd wrap herself in during late-night movies. Even the smell of her perfume that lingered longer than I wanted it to. So I buried myself in work. The hammer and saw became my therapy. And Ethan, well, he became my reason. He was all I had left, and I swore I'd do whatever it took to make sure he had a better life than I did. When Ethan grew up, he was everything a father could be proud of. Smart, driven, polite. He got a good job in finance and started dressing sharper than I ever did. He'd come by every Sunday bringing groceries or takeout, trying to make sure I was eating right. Sometimes we'd sit out on the porch, just the two of us, watching the sun go down, not saying much, but those moments meant everything. Then one day, he told me he'd met someone. Her name was Chloe. The first time he brought her over, I could tell she was different. Beautiful, yes, and stunning, really. The kind of woman who knew it and didn't let you forget it. Perfect hair, perfect nails, designer handbag. Everything about her screamed polished. She shook my hand and looked me in the eye, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that measured you first. She talked fast, laughed often, and filled the house with energy. Ethan looked at her like she hung the moon, and in that moment I was happy for him. I wanted to be. He'd found someone who made him light up again, and after losing his mom, that meant the world to me. Still, I couldn't shake a feeling. A quiet instinct that comes with age. I noticed the way she glanced around my house, her eyes pausing on the older furniture, the framed photos, the old tools hanging in the hallway. It wasn't admiration. It was assessment. Like she was trying to figure out the value of everything she saw, including me. But I kept that to myself. I didn't want to ruin anything for him. Sometimes love needs room to find its truth, even if that truth hurts later. A year later, they got married. Small ceremony. Beautiful day. I still remember standing there watching my son take his vows, his face full of hope. Linda would have cried her heart out that day if she'd been there. I felt her beside me, though, in the wind that brushed my cheek, in the sun that broke through the clouds right when they said, "I do." After the wedding, I decided to help them out a little. Ethan had mentioned they were struggling to afford the down payment for a house, and I knew how hard it was starting out. So I offered, quietly, to help. Not because I wanted credit or control, just because that's what fathers do. I paid for part of that down payment through an old savings account Linda and I had set aside. I never told Ethan how much it was, and I sure didn't tell Chloe. I didn't want them to feel like they owed me. I wanted them to start strong, to have something of their own. After the wedding, life slowed down for me. I'd sold most of my construction equipment, retired the company name, and kept just one thing for myself: the land. It wasn't much to look at. A few acres off the main road, some woods and a small stream that ran through the back. But to me that land was sacred. It was where I built my first workshop, where I taught Ethan how to swing a hammer, where Linda and I had picnics when we couldn't afford vacations. It was our little piece of the world, unshaken, untouched, and mine. I didn't brag about it. I didn't even talk about it. I just paid the taxes every year, kept it clean, and held onto it quietly. Most people saw a patch of dirt. I saw a lifetime of work, and maybe a safety net for whatever storms might come. And as it turned out, that land would soon become more than a memory. It would become the key to everything that followed. At the time, I didn't know it. I didn't know that a piece of dirt could divide a family, test loyalty, and expose the truth about who people really are. But life has a funny way of showing you value, not in what you own, but in who respects it, and respect was something I was about to learn had a price. It was early spring, one of those evenings where the air feels clean again after months of cold. I still remember the call from Chloe that morning, cheerful, rehearsed, almost too polite. "Dad, we're having a small family night tonight. Just you, me, and Ethan. I want you to see the new place now that we're finally settled in." Her voice was sweet, but there was something underneath it. That tone people use when they want to show you something rather than share something. Still, I agreed. I figured it'd be nice to spend a quiet evening with my boy. By 6 o'clock, I was pulling into their neighborhood. It wasn't far from town, just past the old highway where the houses start looking less like homes and more like magazine covers. Manicured lawns, spotless driveways, expensive cars that probably never saw a dirt road. Ethan had done well for himself, and I was proud of that. Their house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, lights glowing soft and gold through big glass windows. It looked impressive, no doubt about that, but there was something sterile about it too, like it was built to be admired, not lived in. I parked my old pickup truck by the curb. The engine rattled to a stop, and for a moment I sat there, looking at the reflection of that house in the windshield. A part of me wondered if I'd look out of place in there. I was wearing my usual jeans, boots, and my leather jacket. The same jacket Chloe had laughed at the last time we met. I almost left it behind that evening. Almost. But then I thought, no. This jacket's part of who I am. If that's not good enough, then that's not my problem. I grabbed the bottle of bourbon from the passenger seat, a bottle I'd kept sealed since the day Linda and I got married. We'd always planned to open it together on our 25th anniversary. She didn't make it that far, but I still couldn't bring myself to drink it alone. Tonight, I thought, maybe sharing it with my son would be a way to honor her memory. A quiet toast to family. When Chloe opened the door, the smell of something fancy hit me. Rosemary, garlic, and maybe a hint of something I couldn't pronounce. She was dressed to the nines for what she'd called a small family night. Her smile was camera ready. "William, so glad you could make it." She said my name like she was greeting a client, not family. Inside, the place looked less like a home and more like a showroom. Everything was spotless, perfectly arranged. Marble countertops, glass tables, not a speck of dust in sight. You could practically hear the silence bouncing off the walls. I handed her the bottle of bourbon. "Thought we could share something special tonight. Been saving this one a long time." Her eyebrows lifted like I'd handed her a jar of dirt. She took it, read the label, and gave a polite little smile. "Oh, we don't really drink that kind of stuff here. Ethan prefers imported wine." Her tone was gentle but dismissive, the kind of softness that still cuts deep. Ethan appeared from the kitchen then, sleeves rolled up, looking happy to see me. "Dad, glad you made it. Come on in." I followed him to the dining area, and it felt like walking into a hotel suite. Every chair perfectly angled, every fork and knife placed with military precision. There were no family photos on the wall, no clutter, no life. Just a designer's idea of perfection. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was overthinking. I took a seat, placed the bourbon beside me as we ate. Chloe talked, mostly about work, her social events, and how she'd just joined some young professionals club. She dropped names like they were confetti. Every sentence had a shine to it, but no soul. Ethan chimed in every now and then, but I noticed he wasn't the same easygoing son I used to know. He spoke like he was careful, like every word was weighed before it left his mouth. At one point, Chloe looked over at me and smiled that same smile she'd worn before. Sweet, but sharp around the edges. "You really don't care about appearances, huh, William? That's kinda cute." She said it like it was a compliment, but it wasn't. That word, cute, hit harder than it should have. Maybe because it carried something I'd fought my whole life against. Pity. That soft, condescending pity people give when they think they've outgrown you. I could feel the silence stretch across the table. Ethan laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Chloe, he's just old school. That's Dad for you." I smiled, nodded, kept eating. Didn't say a thing. You learn with age, not every insult deserves a reply. But I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't teasing. She was judging. Her gaze lingered on my hands, rough and scarred from years of building. On my jacket, faded and cracked. on my boots dusty from the drive. To her, I wasn't a man who built things. I was a man who'd failed to move on, a relic from a world she didn't understand and didn't care to. I sat there quietly, cutting into the steak she'd probably paid a fortune for, and all I could think about was Linda. How she would have reached across the table, placed her hand over mine, and reminded me that respect doesn't come from money or titles. It comes from how you treat people. But that table felt colder than steel. Ethan started talking about his new promotion, how he was thinking of expanding into real estate investment. He said the words like they were golden keys to a brighter future. I listened. Then Chloe jumped in, saying how she had a vision for development projects, something about turning underused land into modern communities. That's when she looked straight at me and said, "You've got some land out by the highway, right, William? Maybe we could help you put it to better use." Her voice was sugary, but her eyes were calculating. I chuckled softly and said, "That land's done more for me than you'd think. I like it just the way it is." She tilted her head, smiled again. "Oh, come on, don't be sentimental. It's just dirt, isn't it?" I don't know if it was the way she said just dirt or the way Ethan stayed quiet again, but something in me went still. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just took a slow sip of water and looked around that perfect the house my down payment had helped them afford, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and pride. Sadness, because my son didn't stand up for me. Pride, because I realized I didn't need to prove anything to her. When dinner ended, Chloe hugged me at the door. "Thanks for coming, William. We'll have to do this again soon. Maybe next time you can bring that land paperwork. I'd love to take a look." I smiled, nodded, and stepped out into the cool night. The air hit different, honest, unpolished, real. Walking to my truck, I glanced back at the house one last time. The lights were bright, but the warmth was gone. I started the engine, let it idle, and sat there for a minute. I ran my hand over the bourbon bottle resting on the passenger seat, unopened, untouched, and I whispered to myself, "Cute, huh?" That was the last dinner I ever attended at their place, and at least as a guest. Because that night, without even realizing it, Chloe had started something she couldn't control. And soon, she'd find out what happens when you laugh at a man who built the ground you're standing on. The next morning, the sun came up like it always did, but everything felt different. The air in my house was heavy still, like even the walls knew something sacred had been broken. That piece of land wasn't just property to me. It was a symbol, a lifetime of sweat, grit, and quiet dignity. I'd started with nothing. Just a pickup truck, a few tools, and a reputation built on my word. That land was the one thing I'd kept untouched, a promise to myself and to Linda that someday when I was done working, we'd build our final home there. She's gone now. But the promise wasn't, and now that promise had been stolen, not by strangers, but by my own blood. I spent the whole morning pacing around my porch, running my fingers through my hair, staring at the field across the street, every thought twisted into another. I could still see Ethan as a little boy sitting beside me in that old pickup, holding a tape measure, pretending to help me on job sites. I used to tell him, "Son, never take what isn't yours, no matter how easy it looks." And now here we were. By noon, I'd calmed down enough to drive to their house. I wasn't going there to fight. I just needed to understand. When I got there, Chloe opened the door with that same cold, polished smile. She was wearing one of those silk robes, the kind that said I'm comfortable and in control. "Oh, William," she said like she was talking to a neighbor she barely liked. "Did you get our letter?" "Our letter?" I repeated. My voice felt strange, quiet, but sharp. She leaned against the doorframe. "Ethan's busy right now, but yes, we've decided to move forward. You'll get your share once the sale finalizes. Don't make it complicated," I clenched my jaw. "Share? My own land, my own signature." And she had the nerve to call it a share. Ethan came out from the living room, holding a coffee mug like this was just another Sunday. He looked pale, unsure, like a man already drowning but pretending he wasn't. "Dad, look, Chloe's just trying to help. You don't have the time or resources to manage development. We can handle it. It's family, right?" "Family?" I repeated. "Son, family doesn't forge signatures." The silence that followed was loud enough to choke on. Ethan looked at the floor. Chloe crossed her arms and said in that sugary, poisoned tone, "You've done enough, William. It's time to let the next generation take over. Be grateful we're including you at all." I stared at them both for a long time. I wanted to shout, to tell her that without me she wouldn't even have that roof above her head, that her fancy kitchen and imported wine glasses were built on the money I gave them. But what good would yelling do? Words wouldn't change hearts already turned to stone, so instead I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I said, "All right, you want to play business? Then let's play business." Then I turned and walked away. That night, I sat in my living room, same worn-out couch, same faded jacket she laughed at, and poured myself a glass of that old bourbon she'd turned down. I let it burn down my throat. I thought about Linda. She'd always been the calm one, the smart one. She used to say, "William, sometimes the quietest revenge is success they can't touch." And in that silence, something inside me shifted. I stopped being the old retired poor man Chloe thought I was. I became something else, and a man with a plan. Before going to bed, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. The folder. The one that held all my property deeds, tax papers, and company records. As I flipped through them, I saw something that made my heart tighten. The original deed to the land with my name written clear as daylight. My name, my signature, my power. They'd started a game they thought they could win, but what they didn't know was that they were standing on a chessboard I'd built long before they were even born, and the next move was mine. That night, for the first time in months, I slept with a faint smile on my face. Because they hadn't just taken my land, they'd woken up the part of me that knew how to build and rebuild from nothing. They thought they'd pushed me out, but all they'd done was push me into action. I'll never forget the look on her face that day, the exact second her perfect little world began to crack. But before that glorious moment came, there were weeks of quiet, deliberate preparation. Revenge, at least the kind that lasts, isn't about rage. It's about patience, about letting the truth walk and wearing a suit and tie while arrogance burns itself out. After that night on my porch, bourbon in hand, I called up Mike Turner, an old friend who'd been my lawyer for over 30 years. Mike's one of those men you don't fully appreciate until you see him in a courtroom. Calm, sharp, with that slow Ohio drawl that sounds friendly until you realize he's gutting the other side's case. Word by word. We'd built houses together once, too. Him helping with contracts, me laying the foundations. He'd helped me and Linda set up the property trust all those years ago, back when we were thinking about future security. I still remember the day we did it. Linda was sitting beside me, her hand on mine, saying, "William, one day when we're gone, I don't want anyone twisting our work into something ugly. Let's protect it." So we put the land into an irrevocable trust, airtight, legally bulletproof. No transfer, no sale, no development without my written consent. It was supposed to be for peace of mind. But now it was my secret weapon. When I called Mike that morning, I half expected him to scold me for waiting this long. But when I told him everything, the forged signature, the arrogance, the insult, he actually laughed. "So your daughter-in-law called you poor, huh?" he said, leaning back. "Let's see how rich she feels when the lawsuit hits." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. We got to work right away. Mike pulled the trust documents from his archives, polished them up, cross-checked the property records, and compared signatures. Within 2 days, he had everything lined up. A neat, ironclad pile of evidence that could legally crush their fake development. But I didn't want to go to court. Not yet. See, Chloe was obsessed with image. She didn't just want success, she wanted applause. So I decided to let her build her own stage before pulling the curtain. For weeks, I kept my head down. I even stopped calling Ethan. Let them think I was sulking, that I'd given up. It only made their confidence grow. I'd see them in town, her driving that new SUV, talking big about Carter developments, handing out cards with her name printed in gold. People were impressed. They'd pat her on the shoulder and say, "That father-in-law of yours must be proud." If only they knew. Then came the announcement, the Carter Development Launch Gala. A big event, hosted at one of the fancy new venues downtown. Invitations printed, press notified, investors invited. They even had a banner with the tagline, "Building the Future," on family land. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Mike and I decided that was the night. The evening of the launch. I put on that same old jacket Chloe had mocked, the one she said made me look simple. I wanted her to see it, to remember it. I brushed it off, straightened my collar, and walked into that glittering hall like I owned it. Because, well, technically, I did. The place was packed. Lights, champagne, photographers snapping away. Chloe stood at the center, glowing under the spotlight, holding Ethan's hand like she owned him too. She looked powerful, the kind of woman who thought the world had already bowed to her. When she saw me, she gave me a little smirk, like I was some uninvited relic from the past. "Oh, William, you made it. That's surprising," she said, her voice sugary enough to rot teeth. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied. The speeches began. Investors clapped. Chloe took the stage, radiating pride. Her voice carried through the room, smooth, confident, rehearsed. "We're proud to be building the future on this beautiful family land," she said, smiling like a queen giving a decree. "My husband and I believe in legacy, in taking something old and making it shine again." The room erupted in polite applause. Cameras flashed, and that's when Mike stepped forward from the back, his presence quiet but commanding. He wasn't a loud man, but when he spoke, people listened. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "I'm Mike Turner, legal counsel for Mr. William Carter." Chloe blinked, confused for a moment, then forced a smile. "Oh, how nice," she said. "Did my father-in-law finally decide to—" "Actually," Mike interrupted, "I'm here to inform you that you're currently developing property that does not belong to you or your company. This land is held in a private trust, under the sole authority of Mr. Carter. Any attempt to sell, build, or invest under its name is considered a violation of state law and constitutes fraud." The room froze. Cameras stopped clicking. The investors glanced at each other. Chloe's confident smile faltered, just slightly, but it was enough to see the panic start to bloom behind her eyes. Ethan stepped forward, stammering, "Wait, what's going on?" Mike handed him the papers, crisp, official, undeniable. "What's going on," he said evenly, "is that someone forged a legal signature. And now that we've filed a motion to suspend all permits tied to this project, every dollar invested here is frozen until further notice." The silence that followed was beautiful. You could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. You could hear her breath catch. And in that silence, Chloe finally realized the poor old man she'd laughed at wasn't standing there to stop her. He was standing there to end her. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. I just watched as the color drained from her face as the investors slowly backed away, whispering. One of them muttered, "Is this legal?" Another said, "Wait, they forged it?" Chloe tried to speak, tried to smile through it, but her voice cracked. This must be a mistake." "Ethan, say something." But Ethan just stood there holding those papers, his hands trembling. And me? I just turned to walk away. Slow, steady, the way a man does when the job's already done. As I reached the exit, Mike leaned toward me and said quietly, "You want to press charges?" I smiled. "No," I said. "Let her press her own luck. I just want her to see what happens when you mistake decency for weakness." And that night, as the lights dimmed and her empire began to crumble, I walked back into the cold with my old jacket and a peace I hadn't felt in years. Because revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just signs its name on the dotted line. The courthouse that morning felt colder than usual, not because of the air conditioning, but because of what was about to happen inside. There's a particular stillness that hangs over a place where truth is about to speak. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, and it's heavy, steady, and final. I remember sitting in that long wooden bench near the front, my hands folded, my old jacket hanging neatly over my arm, the same one Chloe once mocked. Funny how life circles back like that. Across the aisle, Chloe sat in her sharp gray suit, her hair tied perfectly, face painted in confidence. But I'd seen that look before. The kind people wear when they're trying to convince themselves they still have control. Ethan sat beside her, head low, hands clasped so tight his knuckles turned white. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and I didn't blame him. Shame has its own kind of silence. When the judge entered, the room went still. The air thickened with that mix of fear and formality that courtrooms always have. You could practically hear Chloe's breath quicken. She'd hired one of those high-end attorneys, polished, smug, and too confident for his own good. the kind who believed charm could bend truth. He stood, smiled, and started talking about family misunderstandings, about how William Carter, out of confusion or age, may have misinterpreted the document's age. Confusion. That word hit me like a quiet insult. I sat there calm on the outside, but deep down I could feel the weight of Linda's memory pushing me to stay composed. She always told me, don't shout when the truth can whisper for you. Then it was Mike's turn. My old friend didn't waste a breath. He stood slow and confident, his voice steady as bedrock. Your Honor, he began, this isn't a misunderstanding. It's manipulation, clear, intentional, and documented. He started laying out the evidence one by one. The trust papers perfectly preserved, my signature right beside Linda's. The deed transfer records showing ownership still in my name. The certified copy of the trust clause that stated no sale or development could occur without my written consent. Then came the kicker, the forensic report comparing my real signature with the forged one Ethan had submitted under Chloe's instruction. The difference was unmistakable. Chloe tried to keep her chin up, but her face had gone pale. Her lawyer objected, of course, cawing. Tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding, that perhaps the paperwork had been accidentally duplicated. But Mike was relentless. He held up printouts of emails, actual correspondence Chloe had sent to potential investors using phrases like my property, and I inherited this land. Through my husband's family, the courtroom murmured. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mike called Ethan to the stand. My son looked like a boy again. Not the confident man he used to be, but a frightened, cornered soul torn between loyalty and guilt. He hesitated before standing, his eyes flicking toward Chloe, then me. For a second I thought he might lie, that he might protect her even now. But something in his face cracked. He took the oath, and when Mike asked the first question, "Did you sign your father's name on the transfer documents?" Ethan's voice came out low and trembling. "Yes," he said. "I did." A few gasps echoed in the room. Chloe's head snapped toward him, eyes wide like she couldn't believe he'd turned on her. Mike pressed gently. "Did you do this on your own?" Ethan swallowed, looked down, and whispered, "No." Chloe said it was just a formality. She said Dad would never find out and that we'd fix it later. I didn't know she sent those investor emails." The judge's face hardened. Chloe's lawyer tried to interject, but the damage was done. Every word had landed. Chloe finally spoke, her voice sharp and desperate. "He's lying. He's just trying to save himself," she yelled. But it was too late. Her mask had cracked. The calm, elegant woman who once looked down at me like I was beneath her was now a mess of anger and fear, her voice echoing off the courtroom walls. The judge banged the gavel once. "That's enough, Mrs. Carter." From that point on, the trial felt more like a formality than a fight. The facts were there. The signatures, the trust, the emails, and it all laid bare. And no amount of arrogance could twist the truth once it stood in the light. When the verdict finally came, it was quiet, almost gentle. All ownership and control of the property are hereby restored to Mr. William Carter. All business operations conducted under Carter Developments are to be frozen effective immediately, pending investigation for fraud. The words hung in the air. Chloe didn't move. Ethan sat still, head bowed. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, given your son's involvement, would you like to pursue criminal charges for the forgery?" The whole room went silent. I could feel every eye on me. And for a moment I thought about it. About all the nights I'd spent alone, all the times I'd been insulted, all the ways they tried to make me small. But then I looked at Ethan. He wasn't a villain, just a man who'd lost his way. And I thought of Linda, who would have told me that revenge without mercy just breeds more misery. So I took a deep breath and said, "No, Your Honor. My son made a mistake, but I believe he was pressured. I'm not here to destroy my family, and I just want the truth to stand." The judge nodded. "That's noted." And just like that, it was over. Chloe's accounts were frozen. Her company was done, her reputation shredded. She walked out of that courtroom with her heels clicking on the marble floor, trying to hold her head high. But I could see the tremor in her step. She'd lost everything she built on lies. Ethan stayed behind. He looked at me for the first time in weeks, eyes red, full of shame. "Dad," he said softly, "I don't know how to fix this." I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You start by never letting someone else tell you what's right again." He nodded, tears welling. And for the first time I felt something lighter inside me. Not victory, not pride, just peace because justice had spoken. Not through revenge or rage, but through truth. And in that courtroom, truth was louder than any insult Chloe had ever thrown my way. The weeks after the court case felt strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that fills your house when a storm finally passes. But the air is still thick with the smell of rain. I went back to my usual routines, early mornings on the porch with a cup of coffee, fixing up little things around the house that didn't even need fixing, just to keep my hands busy. Life felt simple again. Peaceful even. But peace has its own kind of loneliness too. After all the chaos, the shouting, the paperwork, and the courtroom drama, the silence hit different. It wasn't empty and it was reflective, like the world was giving me space to think about what had happened and what it had cost. Then one gray afternoon, about 3 weeks after the verdict, there was a knock at the door. A slow, hesitant knock. I didn't need to check to know who it was. When I opened it, there stood Ethan, not the polished man in the expensive suit I'd grown used to seeing, but my boy, my son. Just jeans, a flannel shirt, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept right in days. His eyes were tired, and there was no trace of that false confidence Chloe used to wrap around him. He looked smaller somehow, like he'd been carrying too much weight for too long. "Hey, Dad," he said softly, voice cracking a little. I didn't say anything, just nodded and stepped aside so he could come in. He walked past me slow, like a man entering a church he didn't feel worthy of. We sat at the table, the same table where he used to do his homework when he was a kid, where Linda used to serve her famous meatloaf on Sundays. The room smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. For a long time, we just sat there. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Dad," he said, barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry. For everything. I let her change me. I forgot who I was, who you raised me to be." I looked at him, really looked, and what I saw wasn't anger or betrayal anymore. It was regret. Honest, heavy regret. His eyes were red. His hands fidgeted with his sleeve like he used to when he was a boy confessing something he'd broken. I didn't give him a lecture. Didn't ask for an explanation. Words didn't matter anymore. So instead I stood up, walked around the table, and just pulled him into a hug. A long, quiet hug. He tensed at first, then just broke down. I could feel his shoulders shake as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I patted his back and said, "It's all right, son. Just don't lose yourself again. Money and pride, they don't build a man. Character does." We stood there for a while, father and son, two broken people trying to rebuild something that should have never been torn down. After he calmed down, we sat and shared supper. Nothing fancy, just leftover stew and bread. The kind of meal that once filled this house with laughter. But that night, the silence over supper wasn't uncomfortable. It was healing. Every now and then, Ethan would look up at me like he wanted to say more, but I'd just nod and keep eating. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need a speech. It just needs presence. He told me he'd moved out of their house. Chloe had packed her things a week after the verdict and left town. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't apologize. Didn't even fight for the house, and she just disappeared. Her company collapsed faster than anyone expected. Once the truth hit the papers, fraudulent development deal exposed, the investors vanished overnight. Lawsuits piled up. The same people who toasted her at the launch party now avoided her like the plague. Ethan said she tried to blame him at first. Told reporters he'd forged the papers without her knowledge, but the emails and documents proved otherwise. Eventually, even her own lawyer dropped her case. Last he heard, she'd moved to Cincinnati, working in some small firm trying to rebuild her life from scratch. "Still chasing the same dream," Ethan said quietly. "Still thinking it's about money," I nodded slowly. I didn't wish her harm. Truth be told, I almost pitied her. People like Chloe live in a world made of glass, and they think it's beauty, but it's really fragility. The first real crack, and it all comes down. That night after Ethan left, I sat back on the porch with my coffee. The sky was painted orange with the sunset, the same color Linda used to love. The old oak tree rustled in the breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt a kind of calm I hadn't known I was missing. I thought about Chloe, About her words, her laughter that day she mocked my jacket. I wondered if she ever thought back to that moment. If she ever realized that beneath the old clothes and quiet manners there was a man who still owned his dignity, his peace, and his truth. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't, but it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in a long time I felt whole again. The land was mine. My name was cleared. My son had come home. And in the quiet hum of the evening, as I sat there watching the sun dip below the horizon, I whispered to myself, "Linda, you were right. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living with your head high." A month had passed since the trial, 30 quiet, reflective days that felt like the world was finally breathing again, after holding its breath for too long. The chaos had settled, the papers were signed, and the truth was finally resting where it belonged. Life had found its rhythm again, slow and deliberate, the way it used to be before greed and pride tried to rewrite my story. One crisp afternoon, with autumn leaves swirling around the sidewalks like old memories, I decided it was time to do something I'd been meaning to: take Mike Turner out for lunch. Mike had been more than just my lawyer. He was an old friend, one of the few who'd stood beside me back when times were tough, when I'd lost Linda, when the bills were tight, and when I was trying to figure out what a life alone even looked like. We hadn't shared a proper meal in years, not since before the chaos began. So I called him up and said, "Lunch is on me this time." He laughed over the phone, that same raspy laugh that always reminded me of cigarette smoke and courtroom confidence. "Will, after the show you put on in court, I'd say you've earned yourself the right to buy lunch for both of us." We met at a little diner on Maple Street, the same one where we used to grab sandwiches after long days handling property cases decades ago. The place hadn't changed much. The red vinyl booths were still cracked at the edges, the smell of coffee still hung in the air, and the waitress still called everyone Hon. As we sat down, Mike gave me a long, proud grin. "Will Carter, the man of the hour," he said, shaking his head. "You know, in all my years practicing law, I've seen schemers, dreamers, and fools. But I've never seen someone play patience like you did. You sat there quietly for years while the world thought you'd given up. And then boom. One clause, one trust document, and the whole empire crumbled." I chuckled softly and stirred my coffee. "She thought I was poor, Mike," I said, half smiling. "Guess that's the thing about people like her. They see the surface and think they know the whole ocean." He laughed, a big hearty sound that turned a few heads from nearby tables. "Oh, she'll never forget this one," he said. That look on her face when I stood up in that crowd, I swear I almost felt bad for her. Almost. I smiled, but it wasn't out of pride. More like quiet reflection. "You know," I said after a pause, "revenge." It felt good for a minute, watching the truth finally catch up. But after the dust settled, I just kept thinking, what now? What good is victory if it doesn't build something better out of the ruins? Mike leaned back, his smile fading into thought. "So what did you do with the settlement?" I took a sip of my coffee, looked out the window at the passing cars and said, "Used a small part of it to start a fund. Nothing fancy, just a local program to help young builders and small-town contractors get started. There are kids out there who work hard, who dream of building something real, but they can't get a foot in the door. I figured maybe this money that came from deceit, could turn into something honest for once." Mike raised his eyebrows. "You're still the same man, Will, always finding purpose in pain." I smiled faintly. "Linda used to say that," she said. "You can't let bitterness grow roots. Will, it'll choke out the good things trying to bloom." Guess I finally understood what she meant. We ate slowly, talking about old times, about the cases we'd handled, the people we'd met, the long nights drafting documents under dim desk lamps. He told me about his daughter graduating law school, how she was following in his footsteps. And I told him about Ethan, how he was rebuilding, working with his hands again, helping out on small renovation projects. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. At one point, Mike looked at me and said, "You know, Will, not many men could have done what you did. Most would have burned it all down just to prove a point, but you built something out of it instead." I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. That's what it's about, isn't it? I spent too many years thinking revenge was the finish line. Turns out it was just the doorway to something better. I didn't want to end the story with bitterness. I wanted it to mean something. The waitress came by, refilled our cups, and smiled at us like we were two old souls who'd seen too much but learned how to laugh anyway. Outside, the sun was warm on the windows and a soft breeze stirred the leaves along the sidewalk. As we finished our meal, Mike leaned forward and grinned. "Well, my friend, if there's ever a book written about this, I'm telling you now I'm naming that chapter The Lawyer and the Hidden Clause. It's poetic." I laughed quietly. You always did have a way with words. When we walked out of the diner, the afternoon light hit the pavement just right. Bright, but gentle, like a promise. Mike clapped me on the shoulder before heading to his car. "Take care of yourself, Will, and that fund, I want to see it grow. Maybe one day one of those kids you help will build something with your name on it." I nodded, watching him drive off, then turned my gaze toward the horizon. Life had come full circle. What began as pain had ended in purpose, and as I stood there, the echo of Linda's voice lingered in my heart. "Turn your wounds into wisdom. Will, that's how you honor what you've lost." That day, as I walked home with the autumn wind brushing against my face, I realized something simple yet profound. It was never really about revenge, it was about redemption, not just for me, but for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. So yeah, my daughter-in-law called me poor. She laughed at my jacket, rolled her eyes at my truck, and pitied the house I'd lived in for more than 30 years. To her, wealth was loud. It sparkled under chandeliers and wore designer shoes that never touched dirt. To me, wealth had always been quiet, built from sweat, patience, and the steady rhythm of showing up when no one else would. I can still hear that laugh sometimes. Sharp, polished, the kind that makes a man feel small if he lets it. But I don't feel small anymore. Not because I proved her wrong in court or because I walked away the winner. No, it's because I finally understood that her insult said more about her emptiness than my worth. See, when she looked at me, she didn't see the years I spent building homes that sheltered other families. She didn't see the nights I stayed awake, worrying about bills, or the mornings I drove through rain just to make sure my crew got paid before I did. She didn't see the way I held my wife's hand through her last breath, whispering promises I still keep. She didn't see any of that. All she saw was an old man in an old jacket. But that jacket had seen things. Sunrises over half-built rooftops, coffee stains from long shifts, sawdust clinging to the fabric like memories that refused to fade. It carried the scent of years spent earning instead of taking. And maybe that's something she could never understand, because she'd never had to earn anything. After the court case, when everything went quiet, I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun melt into the horizon. My hands rested on that same old jacket folded neatly beside me. I thought about Chloe, about the girl who believed she could buy respect, about the woman who thought power came from paperwork and property. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt sorry, because no one ever taught her what real wealth looked like. Real wealth is in a name that still means something when you're not in the room. It's in the people who call you when they don't need anything, just to ask how you're doing. It's in the hands that still work even when they ache, and in the heart that forgives when it could easily destroy. She had everything money could buy, but none of what life gives freely to those who live right. And me? I may drive an old truck, live in an old house, and wear the same jacket she mocked, but I sleep in peace. That's something no mansion can afford. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue, fight, or prove myself. All I did was let the truth do what it does best, rise. All I did was let her meet my lawyer, and that was enough. Because sometimes the quietest moves carry the loudest echoes. You see, life has a funny way of teaching lessons without shouting them. Some people learn through kindness, others through consequences. Chloe learned hers in a courtroom full of silence, the kind that follows when every lie collapses at once. And me? I learned something too. That dignity once kept shines brighter than revenge ever could. So if there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening to my story, it's this. Don't measure people by their clothes, their car, or their home. Measure them by how they treat others when they think no one's watching. Because respect, real, honest, earned respect, is the one currency that never loses value. She called me poor. Maybe I looked it, But in the end, she walked away. With empty hands, and I walked away with everything that truly mattered: peace, family, and a clear conscience. And that's what they never taught her. Money fades, titles vanish, beauty dulls, but respect. Respect lasts a lifetime.